Coming back to Lynden, what were some of the big challenges that Lynden was facing when it was first getting started?
Well, if you head back to Phoebe Judson's book, A Pioneer Search for an Ideal Home, I mean, she literally does go through and recount that even by the time she gets to Lynden, she still has not learned how to live in the Pacific Northwest. Because she's lived, for lack of a better term, in or near civilized areas.
So real quick, Phoebe Judson.
Phoebe Judson, Phoebe Judson, considered the mother of Lynden. She's the first white woman with her husband, Holden Judson, the first white woman to settle in Lynden, call it home. Her husband, Holden Judson, is the second white man, the first being a fellow named Colonel Patterson. We don't know a lot about him other than that he was pretty much sort of a scoundrel, and we're pretty sure came out here escaping his past. He's a story unto himself, but it's his deal with Phoebe Judson that establishes Lynden. Because he's come out here, he's built a log cabin. Phoebe and Holden are turning out to be one of those non-success stories. By the time they meet Colonel Patterson, they've bankrupted one business. They bankrupted two farms. They have no ability to lay claim or homestead to anything anymore, having already bankrupted their Homestead Act farm. So they're literally almost homeless.
Right.
And so they run into a fellow named Captain Roeder, who is one of the first founders of Bellingham. He runs a steamship up and down the Puget Sound, and so he sort of knows everybody.
Right.
And so he knows Colonel Patterson, who's coming in out of the wilderness of Whatcom County as one of the few dairy farmers in Washington State to sell his milk. So he knows that Colonel Patterson is in a domestic situation that he needs to fix. His wife has died from tuberculosis. She's Native American. He has two young daughters. Both of them are half white, half Native. And so consequently, while the Nooksack tribe would undoubtedly have taken them in, they were, for all intents and purposes, not even quite orphan material for the settling community.
Right.
And so, and the settling community, of course, is looking at it going, well, we can't give them to savages, which is unfortunate. They probably would have had better care taken of them luckily they got Phoebe Judson. Let's put it that way. If it had been any other settler, there would have been a good chance it would have been really bad. So Colonel Patterson and Phoebe and Holden end up making this deal in that Colonel Patterson will give his land and his cabin, all the bits with it, the herd, the just everything that goes with the homestead, to Phoebe and Holden Judson, as long as his two daughters grow up there. So effectively they become her foster kids.
Right.
And so they agree to it. For some reason, all the failures of the Judsons previous to this magically disappear. Not only do they successfully farm the area, they ultimately end up growing the largest hop fields in Whatcom County and one of the largest hop fields in Washington State.
Wow.
And so if you can imagine the Nooksack Valley, which would be right back here behind me, if you could see through the wall, would have been just one hop field from about Hannigan all the way down to 13th Street, BC.
That's not small.
No, not at all. There are pictures. The museum has pictures, and they're just, you look out over it, and it's just, and hops at that point in time were the big cash crop on the West Coast. Everybody loved their beer, and by God, Whatcom County hops were one of the best.
And nothing's changed.
And really nothing has changed. But that establishes Phoebe Judson here in Lynden. But she'll even say, even at that point, if it wasn't for the first year with Sally and Joe, who she termed Indian Sally and Indian Joe, which were really sort of the last Nooksack couple. They would have been elders of the tribe that were located here and this is where I usually brutally massacre the name, Lakalos, which was the name of the winter camp here in Lynden for the Nooksack tribe. And I mean, it was big. There were estimated over 400 people living here at its height. But most likely smallpox sort of did that in at some point in their history. So it was a reduced group of people living here in Indian and Sally and Jim were the two people that helped Phoebe and Holden figure out how to do things up here. They'd been learning one of the reasons they couldn't really do anything down south with their farms was because it was other settlers teaching them how to farm. And these are settlers who didn't know how to farm when they arrived out here and could barely farm. Southern Puget lowlands are horrible for growing food. Absolutely horrible. They're rocky and nasty. And up here, the Nooksacks were really on the edge of agriculture.
Really?
They were just right there at the horticulture-agriculture line. And so consequently, Sally and Jim taught Phoebe and Holden how to actually grow a farm up here, to grow food up here. And thus they were capable of doing that, which meant that others found out they could do so. The Hawleys arrived. Her mother came up, homesteaded some land. So Lynden began to grow soon after they ostensibly homesteaded, and that would have been 1871.
So then at which point, because I'm not sure which would come first, but when did the Dutch start entering in? Because a lot of those early settlers, you were saying before in a previous conversation we had, that they were largely Swedish, actually.
Whatcom County settlers were, yeah. And Sweden, not the Lynden settlers, but so Ferndale, you get a lot of Swedish settling in sort of that Ferndale, northern Bellingham, along the coast area.
Gotcha.
Up Blaine, Point Roberts, Birch Bay. So along that coastal area, Swedish were at that time probably the single largest ethnic group that were settling Whatcom County. So that would have been the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. It's in the mid-1890s that the Dutch begin arriving. 1890s, oh goodness gracious here. Yeah, 1896 is when the first three of what the Dutch community will become arrive. Douwe Zylstra, Herman Oort, and I can never remember the third fellow's name. Anyway, they had come out to the West Coast from the Midwest, which was where the majority of the Dutch were settling in the United States at the time. And they had gone to Vancouver in Canada because they heard that there were great land prices up there in BC. Well, the land prices were ostensibly great, but they weren't affordable. So, and they had spent all their money taking a train, so they were going to come back down, see if they could grab some work until they could save up and head back. And on the way down, they found the same land type, this sort of peat bog, which for the Dutch, if you're a Dutch farmer, you know how to grow peat bog. I mean, the Dutch and peat, they're really good at around each other. And so they stopped in at the assessor's office and found out that the land prices down here were like a third of what they were going for up in Canada.
Oh.
So they were affordable. And they looked around and were like, we could do this. So they all bought up land, began bringing their families out. By 1900, you have over 200 Dutch people here over the course of, I think, about 17 families. And
that's some big growth.
Yeah, big sudden growth. I mean, Lynden literally doubled within 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
And that then establishes the Dutch era of Lynden's history, where the Dutch become the predominant culture. And in and of itself is an interesting story because there was a lot of friction between the Dutch and the original pioneers. One of those is the example of the Great Saloon Dispute.
The Great Saloon Dispute.
Great Saloon Dispute. Lynden is still one of the few communities in the United States that does not allow drinking and dancing within the city limits in the same space.
In the same space.
You can have bars and you can have dance halls, but you cannot have a dance hall that serves liquor or a bar that allows dancing.
That's funny.
So, and this is still a big issue. I mean, right now, I can tell you the fluoride in the water is a big issue. But Lynden, I think, would still almost come to blows if somebody said, by God, it's time that we allowed a dance hall in Lynden.
It's in the year 2025, the most controversial topic is still the dance floor.
Yeah, it's still a dance floor in Lynden. And this is and this is a direct result of the Dutch influence and the Calvinistic.
So I was actually just going to bring that up then, because I wasn't sure if the Dutch came first or the really strong Christian culture came in next, because I know on every corner here, it's like another Dutch Reformed church of some sort.
Right.
Yeah. So when the Dutch came, that Reformed Protestant movement, did that also kind of like just get its talons in there and never left?
Yes, but not going to say as sort of with the idea of getting its talons in. It was just sort of, it just simply became the majority.
Sure.
The Calvinistic church, the Protestant church, especially the Calvinistic version of Protestantism, especially the Dutch Calvinists.
Yep.
There's a joke, and I do not mean to offend any of your viewers, but I will almost guarantee that if they are actually Dutch, they will laugh. And that is, if you have one Dutchman, you have a religion. If you have two Dutchmen, you have a church. If you have three Dutchmen, you have a schism.
As someone who's currently going to a Dutch church.
Suddenly you understand.
Yeah, I see it. I get it.
There is something about Dutch Calvinism. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is. They are the churches that I find to have to listen to the Bible and all the associated teachings of Christ to be the most hotly debated. You will not find that level of debate in a Catholic church. You will not find that level of debate in a Lutheran church. You will not find it in a Methodist church, Mennonite, anything else. The Calvinists love to argue about the Bible.
And they do it like lawyers.
And yes.
It's because John Calvin was a lawyer.
Yes, and it is a very legalistic aspect. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Dutch are such good at merchants. Is because there's always that. I mean, that's just how they as a culture, the Dutch look at life in legalistic terms. And so, and then when they can't agree, when it comes down to the point where neither of them can make their point legally, they split.
Yeah.
And so in the case of the Dutch churches here, the story of the first and the second Reformed Church, Christian Reformed Church here, is that the first Christian Reformed Church, of course, was the only Christian Reformed Church at the time. It would have been the one that was established in 1900. It's about to have its 125th anniversary. And was made up, had Douwe Zijlstra and Herman Oort and the other guy were some of the founding members of that church. They all directly immigrated from Holland. They spoke Dutch native, naturally.
Oh, I think I know.
Okay.
I think I know this story.
Yeah, you probably have. Their kids did not. Their kids spoke English naturally, and sermons were given in Dutch, which is, according to the Catholic or to the Calvinistic Church, the language that God intended the Bible to be sermons to be given in, and the Bible to be translated to.
Famously, what Jesus spoke.
Yeah. But the kids didn't want to learn Dutch. So they requested a sermon in English. And that began the process. By 1910, you have the Second Christian Reformed Church, in which sermons are given in English. And if you went to the First Christian Reformed Church, the sermons would still be given in Dutch only. And so that was the reason that split, was because basically two generations couldn't agree on the legalistic aspect of what language the Bible should be taught in. And so they split.
Which famously, the churches never had another argument similar to that.
No, they didn't. I was going to say, now moving on, it is also an aspect that among Calvinist Protestant movements is small church and small congregation, which oddly enough, and this is one of the things that comes back to the really cool anthropology piece, there's a number called the Dunbar number. An anthropologist named Dunbar established this number at which human communities break down. Communication is about 215 people.
Really?
Which is about the size at which most Protestant churches will split their congregation into another church.
That's interesting.
It's above 215 or right around that group. That drama that is inherent to human beings, the chaos caused by that drama is too big for the community to be, for lack of a better term, a truly democratic community in which everybody within that community has their voice. At that point, it fractures, and you start getting cliques, you start getting groups, and the Protestant church, and especially Calvinism, just simply said, you know what, we're just going to go with it as human nature. So when a congregation gets too big and too fractious, it just splits. A new congregation is formed.
All right. I'm going to have to bring that up to my Protestant pastor friends. That's an interesting...
Well, the thing that I found was interesting is that it happens at the Dunbar number.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same. The Dunbar number is used in management of corporations.
I kind of guess it just goes to show that even as special as we might think we are, we're not that special. Humans always fall into patterns.
Oh yeah, humans do fall. I mean, the military uses the Dunbar number. in that a company will not be more than 200 before it splits into another company.
Interesting. I know. Yeah, that's funny.
So this natural grouping is used by a tremendous number of different groups who have just simply recognized it and said, yeah, it's a breaking pattern.
It's just evidently so.
Dunbar didn't have to qualify it. We've been using it since then because we just know that 200 to 250 people, you're going to have a schism. You're going to get two groups of fighting at each other, and the community itself will be at detriment because of that.
I'm sure there's a Federalist point to make there, but I realize that this episode does eventually have to end. So, Troy, thank you again for joining me for this conversation. I am thoroughly enjoying these.
Well, good.